Look, the most iconic piece of hardware in Apple's history wasn't actually an Apple invention, and Steve Jobs almost killed it before it even launched. You see, we look back at the iPod as this pristine moment of industrial design, but the reality? It was much more chaotic. I'm going to show you how a desperate search for a functional interface led Apple to look outside their own walls for a technology they didn't even understand at first. It's the story of a borrowed hack that redefined consumer expectations and set a precedent for every smartphone you've ever touched. When you think of the original iPod, you probably picture that clean, white polycarbonate face and the satisfying mechanical rotation of the wheel. Slightly cynical. It feels like it was forged in a secret lab in Cupertino by a team of visionary monks, doesn't it? But the truth is, in early 2001, Apple was in a state of quiet panic. They had the hardware. They had the tiny hard drive from Toshiba, but they had absolutely no way for you to actually navigate your library. Warning. Imagine trying to scroll through 1,000 songs with just a plus and minus button. Sarcastic. It would have been a bloody nightmare, right? This is what I call the ghost in the machine. Apple's designers were obsessed with minimalism, but they were trapped by the limitations of their own engineering. Steve Jobs had a mantra. You should be able to get to any song in 3 clicks. Cynical. That sounds brilliant on a keynote slide. But in practice, it was a mechanical impossibility with the tech they had on hand. Most of the early prototypes were clunky, frustrating, and frankly, quite boring. Intrigued. Now, here's the thing. The breakthrough didn't even come from the engineering team. It came from Phil Schiller, the marketing guy. He was the one who suggested a physical rotating wheel that would allow the user to accelerate through lists. But here's the kicker. Apple couldn't actually build it. They had to go to a company called Synaptics, a firm that mostly made laptop trackpads, to license the core technology. It's a bit of a reality check, isn't it? The very thing that defined the Apple user experience for a decade was a third-party solution, bolted onto a desperate project. At first, Jobs actually hated the idea. He thought it was too mechanical, too un-Apple, and far too prone to failure. He almost killed the project in the boardroom because it didn't feel pure enough. But without that borrowed hardware, the iPod would have just been another forgotten brick in the graveyard of early digital music players. Look, this wasn't a stroke of lone genius. It was a frantic, last-minute pivot that happened to change the world, whilst Apple was looking the other way. Now, if you ask anyone who owned an iPod Classic, they'll tell you all about that Zen interface. Apple marketed it as this seamless, ethereal circle that made navigating a library of 1,000 songs feel like second nature. It felt pure. It felt tactile. But look, I've spent some time digging into the actual architecture of the click wheel. And the reality? Well, it's a lot less Zen and a lot more industrial deception. You see, that satisfying tactile click you remember so fondly? It was quite literally a lie. Under the hood, the click wheel wasn't some breakthrough in consumer elegance. It was essentially a piece of industrial control hardware, repurposed for the masses. It utilized capacitive sensing to trick your brain into feeling a mechanical connection that, quite simply, did not exist in the physical world. Apple knew, right? That a purely touch-sensitive surface would feel cold, unresponsive, and, frankly, a bit alien to your thumb. So, they did something brilliant, and honestly, a bit cynical. They tucked a tiny piezoelectric buzzer inside the casing. Every time you scrolled, that little component fired off a microscopic sound and vibration, just to mimic the feel of a physical ratchet. It was a masterclass in neurological tethering. Apple wasn't just giving you a scroll wheel. They were creating a dopamine-driven feedback loop. By making the interface feel alive, They ensured that every other MP3 player on the market suddenly felt sluggish, cheap, and broken by comparison. You weren't just browsing your library, you were being conditioned to crave the response of a proprietary piece of plastic. But here's the thing. Whilst I was looking closer at the patent filings from that era, I realized this clever piece of engineering wasn't just about user experience. It was about total control. And there was one specific detail buried in the circuit board architecture that suggests Apple was planning for the death of the click wheel before it even became a global icon. When you hold an early iPod in your hand today, it feels like a solid, purposeful piece of history. But look, as I started digging into those 2004 schematics, I realized this was the exact moment the relationship between the consumer and the manufacturer changed forever. We were entering the era of the proprietary trap. Before the click wheel became the standard, gadgets were largely modular, right? I mean, you bought a device, you owned it. And if a button jammed, you could usually find a way to tinker with it. But the click wheel signaled a daunting shift in Silicon Valley philosophy. It was a masterclass in industrial design, brilliant in its simplicity. But it was also a fortress. Apple began moving away from accessible screws, heading toward glue-heavy assemblies and integrated hardware stacks. The click wheel wasn't just a component, it was part of a proprietary black box. By consolidating the interface, the sensors, and the logic board into such a tight, specialized package, Apple effectively ended the era of the hobbyist. They weren't just selling you a music player, they were selling you a closed ecosystem. Think of it like this. If a traditional gadget is a house you can renovate, the post-2004 iPod was more like a high-end hotel room. It's beautiful, it's functional, and it works perfectly, as long as you don't try to move the walls. This marked the transition from user as owner to user as renter.
This lockdown philosophy, born 2 decades ago, is the direct ancestor of the modern tech landscape. It's the reason your smartphone is nearly impossible to repair without specialized heat guns and suction cups. Serious. It's the reason why, quite literally, your hardware has become a subscription. You pay a premium for the device, but you're really just paying for time until the battery inevitably dies and the proprietary assembly makes it cheaper to replace the whole unit than to fix a single part. Cynical. Look, it was a brilliant business move, mate. Ensuring the life cycle of the product was entirely in the hands of the manufacturer. Whilst we were distracted by the satisfying tactile feedback of the scroll, we missed the fact that we were being locked out of our own devices. But here's the crazy part. As I looked further into the engineering logs from that period, I found something even more cynical. This shift toward the black box wasn't just about preventing repairs. Warning. It was about a hidden feature Apple was developing, one that would ensure you stayed in their world, even if you tried to walk away. And it all started with a secret encryption layer that no one was supposed to find. That encryption layer, look, it wasn't just a security measure. Deep. It was the first brick in the wall of a digital fortress. Warning. It ensured that even if you owned the hardware, you never truly owned the experience. When I look back at the iPod today, I find myself asking if the click wheel was a brilliant piece of engineering history or a cautionary tale. Tech forward. I mean, it represents the absolute pinnacle of what I call high-friction design. Nostalgic. You see, this was a time when our tools had a physical weight and a tactile soul. Appreciative. There was a genuine, mechanical joy in that circular motion. Analytical. A sense that you were actually driving the machine, rather than just tapping on a piece of cold, unresponsive glass. But as we move toward an era of invisible tech and AI interfaces that claim to know what we want before we do, I think we need to be careful.
We have to decide if we want gadgets that truly serve us, or gadgets that use clever haptics to manipulate our sense of control, whilst keeping us at arm's length from the actual logic of the machine. The wheel, quite literally, stopped spinning years ago. But the trap it helped build, the walled garden and the illusion of tactile mastery, it's still very much active. It is the silent blueprint for every device in your pocket today. So let me know in the comments, do you miss the friction? Or are you happy living in a world of glass? Subscribe for more deep dives into the silicon that defines us.